Tools for Writing the Winning Offer, Part 2. Are you a home buyer in a hot market, or what is often simply called a seller's market, where you've got to outcompete other buyers in a bidding war in order to purchase your home, and you've already seen video number 1 that we wrote in this series? Well, stick around, because in this overview, we're going to take a deep dive and unpack just a few of those specific tools, in particular, escalation clauses, waiving repairs, and waiving appraisal gaps. Hey everyone, I'm Michael Kreslowski of Team K Realty with RE/MAX Integrity in Corvallis, Oregon. I'm a local real estate agent here, and I shoot a lot of videos about what it's like to live, love, and invest here in the Willamette Valley. So if you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel, hit that thumbs up button, and don't forget to click the bell so that you can be notified immediately when we post new content to our channel. Also, be sure to stick around until the end for a bonus follow-up on what happened for the offer that I wrote for my wife and I. Let's get into it. First, we're going to deep dive into escalation clauses and unpack that tool a little bit more. So an escalation clause, as you recall from the last video, is verbiage in your offer that talks about how you're willing to compete and beat competing offers by, let's say, $1,000 or $5,000 up to a certain max point. Here's the actual verbiage I'm using, and we'll show it on the screen. Buyer agrees to pay $5,000 over the highest net price of any other offer with a maximum price of, in this case, $437,000, so long as proof of other offer terms are submitted to the buyer. A counter offer is required to establish mutual acceptance of the sale price if this clause is invoked. Now you can see that in this particular escalation clause, there's a large increment. We were saying that we're willing to beat competing offers by $5,000. Most escalation clauses that I see don't have that number. They say they're willing to beat competing offers by $1,000. My recommendation to you in the market that we're in here, which is competitive, is to beat competing offers by more than $1,000. Here's why. There's lots of little things that come into play when a seller is calculating their net proceeds. Sometimes there's things like home warranties, different closing dates, and therefore different property tax prorations, all kinds of little things. Beating someone by $1,000 on face value might not actually be beating them by that much money, depending on those other factors. Also, if you are competing with a cash buyer who can close really quickly and not have an appraisal, beating that cash buyer by $1,000 probably isn't going to sound that appealing to the seller, because they'd probably rather go with that cash buyer and just be done and have a really nice, easy, smooth, fast close. That's why I'm often recommending my clients to beat competing offers by $5,000, for example, if they're up for that large of an increment. How high should your escalation clause go? Your escalation clause really needs to go so high that if you get beat by someone else's escalation clause and you end up seeing that property sell for, let's say, $1,000 more than your escalation clause's ceiling was for, that you feel okay with it. And I really want to emphasize the feeling here, because I want you to take a moment, and I know this is going to sound all squishy, but think about what it's going to feel like the day that you get keys to that house that you're bidding on right now. It's going to feel incredible, right? I mean, this is going to be a really big deal. You're talking about buying a home, buying a lifestyle, starting the next chapter of your life there. On the flip side of that coin, what might it feel like for you to see that house close and somebody else drive up and move in the day that the deal is done and it's not you? That might feel devastating. And I know that's overly dramatic. It might not, and that would be a good thing to know, right? But if this is what that house means to you, then you should really make sure that your escalation clause goes high enough that if you get beat by just a little bit, that you really are okay with it. Because I want to make sure that you are achieving your goal and achieving that feeling of a place called home. And this is an important way that you get to do that. So in practical application, it's going to mean that your escalation clause might go really high above asking price. What about escalation clauses with no ceiling? So an escalation clause, as I write them, always say will beat competing offers up to a certain price. I've seen other agents write escalation clauses that don't have a ceiling price on them. In my experience, this hasn't worked out very well, because there's always a ceiling, right? And what the escalation clause is communicating, if there's no ceiling on it, is really that the buyer just wants a phone call, wants a second chance to be able to say, hey, how about this price, because here's where the next one is at. But I've never actually had that buyer say, okay, yes, I'll go with that price when it's been a listing of mine. I've had that phone call where I've said to the other agent, okay, we're at, and I'm making up numbers, we're at $472 right now with the second best offer. You have no ceiling. We'll go with you at, let's say, $473. And they say, well, no, how about we'd really, just take it at like $465 and try to finagle some other thing. It's come across as being a bit disingenuous. So there's mixed reputations with these escalation clauses with no ceilings, and for that reason, in my market, I don't recommend them. I haven't seen it actually serve the clients well. What if your escalation clause wins, but the seller's agent doesn't give you proof of a competing offer? Let's talk about that. So this is a very common concern. You get a counter offer back, and it says, okay, you win, we'll go with you at this price, maxing out your escalation clause or at least invoking it, but we don't want to show you a competing offer. So if that happens, keep in mind that you just received a counter offer. The ball is in your court. It is not an automatic acceptance, right? It's not a live deal yet. You still have 3 boxes on that form. We'll show that on the screen right now. You still have 3 boxes on that form that say buyer accepts, rejects, or counters. And if you're getting that counteroffer, presumably you're going to say that you accept, because that's the whole point, is you win and you're getting the home. But if they're not willing to show you the competing offer, and there could be good reasons why not, you still have the option to say, you know what, I just don't feel good about this, thanks but no thanks. And hopefully that's not what happens, but it does on occasion. Why might the sellers not be willing to show you the competing offer? Maybe the neighbor wrote it, and they put in there that they don't want their offer disclosed for confidentiality reasons. Maybe the seller's agent wrote the competing offer for another client of theirs. Maybe they happen to know that they wrote an offer for someone who knows your buyer, and they don't want that confidentiality broken. There's a lot of potential reasons why. I'm giving you a few that are kind of aloof and off the cuff right now. That may sound kind of oddball, but you don't always actually get the competing offer. And you've got to be prepared mentally to say, if that happens, do we still want to go forward? This is where broker reputation comes into play. When you're working with agents that you've worked with a lot before, and you know that you can trust them, and that they're not just saying there's a competing offer in place when there's not, that does count for a lot, and hopefully that's the case if you end up in that situation. What if the other agent comes back to you and says no escalation clauses? Sometimes this happens. Usually you can avoid that in the first place because your realtor hopefully picked up the phone and had a conversation with the listing agent and talked to them about sending an escalation clause. But it is always possible that a bunch of escalation clauses show up and the sellers get kind of freaked out because they feel like it's overwhelming and too confusing, and they just tell their agent to tell all the buyer's agents, hey folks, no escalation clauses, just give us your highest and best. Well, if that happens, then give an addendum saying here's our highest and best price and see what happens. That might not feel good either, but not everyone's okay with this whole escalation clause thing because they don't want to do the math and they think that it's weird to have a silent auction selling a house, which is pretty much what's going on there. So if that happens, be ready to simply put forth an addendum saying here's our best price, and make sure that that is in fact your best price, because again, if someone beats it by a little bit, you don't get the house. Okay, let's unpack our next tool, which is waiving repairs. Waiving repairs can seem very intimidating for a lot of new buyers in a market like this, because they always have questions about, well, what if there's catastrophic repairs? What constitutes a catastrophic repair? Let's talk about that here. Should you promise no repairs as opposed to waiving repairs up to a certain amount? It seems like it would make a lot of sense to actually waive repairs up to a certain amount. The problem with that I've seen is the perception in terms of how that's received by the sellers. Often in a competitive situation, let's say there's 6 or 7 offers, if there's one offer that's promising no repairs whatsoever, that's going to look way better than an offer that promises to waive repairs up to $2,500. Because that offer that says we'll waive repairs up to $2,500, we'll probably be able to find $2,500 worth of repairs on an inspection report unless it's absolutely brand new construction. There's always some work to do. And so it kind of backfires, I feel like, on a buyer that waives repairs up to just a little bit, because they are very much saying, we're not actually waiving repairs, we're not promising no repairs, we just promise a little bit. And it kind of feels like that buyer could come up with or justify actually renegotiating repairs at some point almost regardless. So I think waiving repairs up to a certain point actually backfires on you. I would encourage you to either waive repairs entirely or not if you're not comfortable with it. Okay, what constitutes a catastrophic repair? Because when we waive repairs, we often do say that we're still maintaining the inspection contingency to make sure there's no catastrophic repairs needed that were unforeseen or unexpected. So the house falling into a sinkhole when you didn't realize it was falling into a sinkhole is a great example of a catastrophic issue that was unforeseen. The house needing all new doorknobs because they're broken, or bathroom ventilation fans because the ball bearings are going is not a catastrophic repair. That's pretty typical of most of the homes in our market. Let's break down some other examples that are in between. Fogging the attic. In my market in Corvallis, Oregon, we have a lot of older homes. They've had roofs replaced over the years and insulation added, but not necessarily adequate ventilation added when those things have occurred. So we very often see kind of moldy, mildewy attics. Sometimes these are disastrous and they really need a disaster restoration company to come in, and that's expensive. But usually they just really need a little more ventilation added and fogging of the attic with a concrobium moldicide or mildewcide, whatever that's called, by a contractor who knows what they're doing. So fogging the attic is a pretty typical thing. It almost feels like, and I am kind of exaggerating, but it almost feels like if your attic doesn't need to be fogged when I'm helping you buy a house in this area, bonus. It's just seemingly every day. So fogging the attic is not a catastrophic repair. And in my market, we've got contractors that can do that with their eyes closed for $400 or $500. It's just not a huge deal. How about galvanized plumbing? Corvallis, again, slow growth community, so not a lot of development over the years. Got a lot of older homes. A lot of those older homes have issues with plumbing and electrical. These are things that your buyer's agent is probably looking for while you're looking at the home in the first place. And we're not pretending to be home inspectors, we are not, but there's things that you can see and therefore set up expectations. And galvanized plumbing, for example, is one of them. We have a lot of homes built in the 50s and 60s that have galvanized plumbing, and over time, right around now, those galvanized pipes are starting to fail. They get pinhole leaks in them, and they start to corrode from the inside out and clog up. So finding out that you have galvanized plumbing in a house during the home inspection usually doesn't constitute a catastrophic issue that was unforeseen or unexpected, because if you open up the kitchen sink drawers or bathroom sink drawers or look at the plumbing coming out of the water heater, you can usually tell if that's going to be the case in the first place. So something to just be aware of and expect in this market is that you might need to do some plumbing and electrical updates, and that doesn't mean it's going to count as catastrophic. So just want you to be aware of that. And hopefully this is conversations you're having with your buyer's agent if it's not me when you're showing the home anyway. How about the electrical panels? In this market, we have a lot of homes that have Zinsco or Federal Pacific electric panels, and I hope I'm recalling that correctly, but the Zinsco panels, they, I believe, went out of business a long time ago because they were not tripping the breakers in times when they were supposed to be tripping the breakers, and there were some homes that burned down as a result of this. So this is a pretty easy thing to look for. When we're seeing the home in the first place, we often just open the electrical panel, take a look, and see if it's that particular brand. Finding out that it's that particular brand and should probably be replaced during the home inspection is not something that is a catastrophic surprise. It's something you can probably be aware of before you ever get that far. And we pop out these Zinsco panels and replace them pretty regularly for between $1,500 and $2,000. It does not usually count as a catastrophic repair, warranting renegotiating the entire process if you've promised no repairs. Really, it's something you just need to be prepared for. If the home appraiser, not inspector, but if the home appraiser ends up calling out that Zinsco panel and saying that the deal's not going to close until it's done, figure that you've already heard this information ahead of time and you're going to be the one as the buyer covering that expense in most cases for the deal to close. What if the roof is toast? Okay, if the roof is toast and you actually couldn't tell that from the ground the day you saw the home, and it just showed up during the home inspection as a new data point, a new piece of information, that might end up counting as a catastrophic repair. But it always depends on how much it's going to cost to replace that roof, and if there is a backup offer in place right behind you telling the sellers that they will take the house as is if you try to renegotiate that roof. So you're going to have to play that one by ear and see what happens. Usually if you can tell that the roof is toast before the inspector even gets there, then it's not going to count as a catastrophic repair, warranting renegotiation if you promise no repairs, because it's not a surprise. How about a sewer line failure? I always encourage buyers with city properties to do a sewer scope. It's basically putting a camera down the lines. It's kind of like giving the house a colonoscopy. It's about once a year that we have to dig up somebody's yard because it turns out that the lines they thought were in perfect condition are completely failed. Sewer line failure is usually a surprise, because you could not tell that before. The seller is always saying, my lines are in perfect condition, we haven't had any backups. Buyers don't know otherwise until they get a camera down there. So that one, play by ear, see what happens. But again, if there is a backup buyer in position right behind you and you're the first position buyer, that backup buyer is probably going to tell the sellers, yep, we'll take it as is and we'll fix it later. See what happens. I've got a deal right now where the sewer line had a catastrophic failure, pretty complicated one, and it turns out that my seller is actually taking care of that because it was a big deal and it just needs to get done for anyone to buy the house. So play it by ear. How about a septic problem or a well problem on country property? Same kind of thing. You got to see how competitive it is. Often when we get further outside of town, we don't have as much competition for those homes. So there may not be a buyer in backup position behind you if you're the first position buyer who has the home under contract. If that's the case, you may very well be able to get the septic system or the well taken care of if there were problems there. And often that ends up being the case because the lender won't lend on the house anyway if the well doesn't have, basic potability or certain flow, for example. So in those cases, at least in my experience, I've seen the buyer have a little bit more leverage. See that? There's a little bit of, glistening light at the end of that tunnel. All right, hope that helps in terms of waiving repairs. Now let's talk about appraisals. There's information, there's buzz on the internet about waiving appraisals. That's a tricky thing. In the market that we're in right now, we are still in the pandemic at the time that I'm filming this video. It's the end of July 2020. So interest rates are incredibly low. It seems like everyone in the world is refinancing their mortgage, and a lot of other people that aren't refinancing are purchasing. Appraisers are super backed up. I've actually seen some deals where the appraisal has been waived by the lender. And just because the automated underwriting system, I guess, says, oh yeah, sure, the house is totally worth that much and the appraisers are too backed up to get there anyway, the financed deals with a loan have actually gone through without appraisals, usually because the buyer also has a, let's say, 50% down payment. But when I talked with lenders about even sharing that with you, they said it might not be good to put that on YouTube because you really don't want to have buyers get, false expectations. This is not a normal thing that tends to happen. So what usually does happen is when we write an offer, and again, we're unpacking that tool, we often say that if we've got a loan and we're escalating way up, that we're willing to cover a difference in purchase price in the event of a failed appraisal price up to, let's say, $10,000 or $20,000, something like that. Because again, that's a way to beat a cash buyer that doesn't need the appraisal in the first place. You're assuring the seller that even if the appraiser doesn't put their stamp of approval on that price, that you're going to cover the difference and your loan will still close. I would recommend talking with your lender about that, and this is another great reason to have a phenomenal local mortgage broker or local lender who's got a great reputation and is really in tune with your local market and not just a person at a random call center somewhere with an online company. That usually doesn't work out as well in my experience. So can you waive part of the appraisal? Yes, definitely. I usually use verbiage saying that as long as the appraised value is at least the list price, we'll waive it up to, let's say, 5, 10, 15, 20K, but it always depends on what the buyer is able to do. Talk with your lender, see what options there are to structure the loan or restructure the loan and maybe have a smaller down payment in the first place to preserve some of those reserves off to the side if you need them. And then maybe if you don't need them, you have the option to put them right back towards the down payment, have a bigger down payment, which the seller's not going to care about, they'll be happy, and close the deal. All right, quick bonus section. If you've stuck around this long, you've probably also watched our first video where we talk about the tools in the toolbox in the first place. The bonus section to that video was me telling you that as I filmed that video a little while back, I had actually just submitted an offer for my wife and I to buy a new personal residence, a new home to live in. What happened with that offer? Well, if you're a subscriber to our YouTube channel, you've probably noticed that it got spoiled already, but we got it accepted. So I really appreciate you rooting for me, and here's what it took to get that accepted. And this might sound crazy, and this doesn't happen every time, but we really went all in to make it happen. We did an escalation clause of about $60,000 over the asking price. That escalation clause was beating competing offers by 5K, not 1K. We managed to get an appraisal waiver at the price that it worked out at, somehow phenomenally thanks to the pandemic, which seems weird to say because the appraisers were too busy and the price was still okay, according to automatic underwriting apparently. So the appraisal didn't even have to happen. And we promised no repairs, which we made good on. There were no repair negotiations. We simply closed the deal and made it really easy for the sellers. So on Friday, got keys to our new home. Let me tell you, it felt amazing. it was really, really an experience, because this was one of the first times that we were buying a home just as normal people to live in, not as a future rental property or duplex to house hack. And in looking back, if I'd watched somebody else get keys to that house, it would have been pretty devastating. It would have been pretty upsetting. And it looks like we actually beat a cash buyer by doing a combination of these tools that I'm sharing with you. Big escalation clause increments, no repairs, so on and so forth. So we actually did make that happen. Did it feel like we were spending an arm and a leg on this place? Yeah, absolutely. It felt crazy. I have a hard time even describing it. But the day we got keys felt amazing, and our entire lifestyle is now changing because we were willing to go all in on that house. So do you have to go all in on every house? No. If it's not worth going all in on, maybe don't. Let it go if there's already 3 or 4 or 5 other offers on the table. But when it's the right house for you, you gotta be willing to go all in, whatever that means for you based on your personal financial situation, to make sure that you do everything you can to make that happen. And I hope that you do with confidence. So I really hope you've enjoyed this video. If so, please do give it a like and leave a comment down below. We're always open to additional ideas for things to shoot videos about that would be helpful for you, our audience, and we really appreciate you checking out the channel. Be sure to look at the playlists feature down below to see other content that might be really helpful for you, and subscribe for more. Really appreciate you checking us out. Have a fantastic day, and bye for now.